The party has just finished their meeting with the Tresdell Council. Laith and Thalum go to Ilieda's apothecary so Laith can get supplies. Laith apologizes, and Iliada reiterates that she doesn't want any trouble. Iliada questions why Thalum is there. He apologizes, and Iliada relaxes slightly. She explains she gets nervous when she sees elves in Tresdell, because she used to be one of the Leaves of Orlea but left Orlaithir. She says some of them won't like the fact she's using elven magic and research to make her living. Iliada asks Laith what brings her to Tresdell. Laith explains she left because she wanted more knowledge than her laboratory in Orlaithir would allow her to get. Laith is looking for a gem for a spell, so Thalum trades 2 of the amber he got from the Dwarven Outkeep and an additional 10 gold for one of Iliada's green gems. Laith asks for a book on alchemy to learn to make potions. It is currently out of the party's price range, but Iliada allows Laith to read the recipe on making a minor healing potion. She reads the recipe and buys the necessary herbs. Thalum trades the topaz for 3 stamina potions. Iliada invites them to have tea with her sometime, as she misses Orlaithir and would like to chat about her home with Laith. Luce and Shay go to Trish's closet to buy clothes for Bowie. Sam pops in to deliver a breakfast sandwich for Trish, who is hungover from drinking at the summer festival. Trish explains she has magic clothing items in the back, if they're interested, because she constantly ends up in strange adventures. Shay gets studded leather overalls, some boots, and a cloak for Bowie. While Bowie is in the changing room, Trish takes Luce to the back. They buy some sexy leather strappy lingerie. Luce goes to the dock to do some target practice. They spend an hour looking through Crow's eyes and trying to use their crossbow to shoot bottles that they set up. Thalum and Laith visit the blacksmith and meet the dwarf Bernor. Laith hides behind Thalum. Thalum has his blades sharpened and buys a small spear for Bowie. Laith whispers to Thalum what she needs, and they buy some sheets of thin iron. Thalum asks for bullets, and Bernor is surprised someone would want them, since they are only used by dwarves. Thalum has to lie and say he is ordering them for a client. Bernor explains he would probably need the bullet so he could study it and build a mold. Thalum lies again and says he will ask his client and get a bullet for him to use as a model. Shay, Quinta, and Bowie go back to the inn. Shay washes Bowie for his new clothes and then prepares to take him to church. Quinta asks if she could spend some time with Bowie, as they are both goblins and haven't had much time to talk, since so much has happened so quickly. Shay agrees and goes to church by herself. Quinta warns Bowie about growing soft towards the party, worried that they won't treat them right because they are goblins. She gives him a dagger and reveals that she does care about them, though, but isn't sure if that's a good thing. They train together. Shay attends a service at the Church of Pelor. Ivara notices Shay attends and chats with her after the service. They explain how the windows are designed to catch the sun at different times of day. Shay asks about the connections the clerics of Pelor have on the continent. Ivara explains the clerics go along with the paladins of Pelor when they go on missions to maintain peace. Thalum and Laith swing by the bakery on their way back to Big Jim's and buy bread and pastries. Laith rents a room and begins to create a homunculus with the green gem she got from Iliada. The gem reminds her of working in her lab with her partner, and she has a flashback. She struggles to make the magical connection with the gem and has to spend extra time constructing the homunculus. Shay returns to find Quinta and Bowie training. She reads in the corner as they spar. Thalum arrives and gives the spear to Bowie. He also gives bread to Quinta and Bowie. The group goes down to dinner while Laith finishes her homunculus. They order a large spread of food and drinks from Sam. As he walks towards the kitchen, a table of young men in goth clothes pull him aside and chat with him. Luce notices one of them has a tattoo in special ink that is common for members of the Thieves' Guild. Luce mentions it to Thalum and approaches them, hoping they can get information from them about the monster Thalum is hunting. Shay backs Luce up. One of the men at the table talks to Luce in Thieves' Camp, warning them that they're undercover and scouting. He then switches to common and pretends to chat about boots he got from Trish's closet. Shay asks them if they could tell them a nice place they could take their friend Luce. They say the garden is a great place with all the flowers, or the back alleys if they're into some drippy mold. Sam brings out the food and drinks with Big Jim's help. Sam brought apple ale, but Thalum instructed him to get regular apple juice. Laith comes down the stairs as Lorgra comes in through the front door of the tavern. Laith and Lorgra order their drinks as Sam places Shay's juice down on the table. Thalum tries to notice if anything is off about Laith, but she hides it well, and Quinta pushes the party to get the drinking started. Thalum orders more food when Sam brings Laith and Lorgra's drink. Lorgra orders meat. Lorgra asks what the group's story is and how elves, a human, and a goblin are traveling together and not killing each other. Laith mentions she has wanted to kill Thalum a few times. Laith is trying to show Luce something in her cloak, but Luce is very distracted by Lorgra's arms. Eventually, Laith nudges them and asks to show them something, and reveals a metal, opalescent green-eyed snake homunculus. Crow goes over and curiously boops the snake's snoot. Laith says his name is Durin. Thalum challenges Lorgra to an arm wrestling match. Lorgra flings Thalum across the bar with barely any effort. Thalum calls Sam over and orders Lorgra another drink. Luce and Laith ask Lorgra about her request for support at the council meeting. She is surprised an elf would care about the orc situation. She explains her people were created to fight whatever strange monsters appeared in the northern mountains. They were meant to be expendable, but they've been surviving against the odds. She explains the orc tribes are split up, some are even further north. The monsters have been increasing in numbers, but when the orcs ask for food, land, supplies, etc., they are consistently denied, even though they are holding the line in the north. She explains they did have a war with the halflings once, but it was because they were desperate for food. They can't hunt in the elven forest because the trees prevent them from doing so. People don't seem to realize if the orcs die, the halflings are next. Lorgra understands the fear the people of Tresdell and other nations might have, that if they support the orcs they might become powerful enough to have their own city and government, and then that might make them a real threat. Thalum asks how they could help the orcs. She says food. There used to be an unenchanted forest they could hunt in, but that has been overrun by the trees of Orlaithir. If they want supplies, the ore and metals that come from Moradun are distributed by Tresdell. It is hard to contact the dwarves directly because they have removed themselves from the main going-ons of the continent. Luce asks Lorgra if they know why the monster numbers are increasing. She says that the orcs don't have the magical knowledge or numbers and supplies to go further north to investigate. She's worried that the council won't take it seriously until it's too late and the orcs are overrun, leaving the rest of the continent wide open. Laith acknowledges that the way the elves have treated people is wrong. She says she'll write a letter to her mother to request the orcs an area for hunting in Orlaithir. Lorgra slams her drink on the table and says she was invited here to celebrate drinking in honor of making Cyrodiil look like a fool in the council meeting. They order another round of drinks. Thalum warns Shay about pacing herself. She says no. Their group begins a drinking competition. Luce drinks very quickly and starts feeling it. Shay cannot keep up with the big drinkers, and Laith takes her and Bowie to bed. Luce vomits and then feels better and jumps back into the game. Laith comes back downstairs to rejoin. Quinta, exhausted from her training with Bowie, falls asleep at the table. Lorgra starts to feel off and calls Sam over. He realizes he gave her a drink made from apples, which Lorgra is allergic to. Laith takes out her medkit and stabilizes Lorgra. They order Lorgra a new drink that she isn't allergic to. They continue drinking. Thalum suavely hits on Lorgra. She says she doesn't think a human can handle an orc. Luce chimes in and asks if a tiefling could handle it. Jim asks Lorgra to be easy on the furniture. Laith offers up her room and gets another one for herself. She carries Quinta up and tucks her in. Laith meditates in the corner. Lorgra explains to Luce and Thalum that her people use sex to build relationships, raise morale, and for physical training. Luce uses their packed weapon in the experience. Luce and Thalum fall asleep, but Lorgra wakes them up and they all use a stamina potion to continue their activities into the morning. The stamina potions also heighten the senses. They end up napping for the duration of a short rest. While they are asleep, Luce is visited by Lilith, who commends them for making friends. She presents Luce with a ceremonial bowl and asks them to fill it with the blood of oppressors so that Lilith may drink from it. Lorgra, Thalum, and Luce awaken. They get ready for the day, and Lorgra says she looks forward to their next council meeting. They make plans to have more fun the following week. Everyone meets up downstairs. Thalum pays the tab from the previous night. They use the collective gold to buy breakfast sandwiches for the trip. Laith shares a beginner's book of Draconic with Luce. Laith goes upstairs to make sure Shay is okay and brings her downstairs. Both her and Quinta have a slight headache from the night before. The party leaves Big Jim's and meets up with Proto by the gate. He is waiting by a cart with the insignia of Pelor. Laith pets the horses and they react kindly to her. Quinta gives Proto the map and hops into the passenger seat. Laith shares the pastries they got from the bakery. Proto addresses Laith as Princess and reminds her he has a boyfriend who has access to a scrying stone. She requests he just call her Laith and asks to forget about that incident. They set off in the cart. They pass the farms that populate the land outside of Tresdell's walls. People wave to Proto and call him by name. They pass children going towards Tresdell on their way to school. Laith infuses Thalum's gun. Proto notices this and asks if she can infuse his Morning Star. Quinta says that she can, and convinces him to hand it over to her. She licks it and hands it back. Laith puts on her eyeglass and tinkers on the gun, changing it into a magic gun with a blue glow that auto-reloads. Luce studies the Draconic book and Laith brews a minor healing potion with her alchemy kit. Luce calls Lilith through the bowl and asks her to deliver a message to their father, letting him know that Luce is okay. Thalum and Bowie train in the back of the cart with the spear. The cart arrives at the edge of the Nomog forest as the sun begins to set. Laith and Thalum see billowing smoke in the distance. Laith notices the red glow of the fire through the trees. Thalum senses enemies with his ranger abilities and mutters kobolds. Quinta overhears him, and Laith points out the fire. Quinta explains there's a goblin village in that direction and readies her axe. As they get closer, they can hear the sounds of screaming and fighting. A goblin spills out of the brush and is immediately dragged back by two kobolds. Quinta demands that Proda stop the cart. Proda says he isn't to interfere without council approval. Leith tells the horses to stop, and the party hops off the cart and heads towards the village. They approach the goblin village. A large stone statue of a goblin warrior stands in the center. Some of the buildings are on fire. Goblins are being put into carts modified with cages. A single goblin is left resisting against the kobolds by the carts. The goblin from the road is being dragged towards the carts by 2 kobolds. A kobold in red robes is sending firebolts into the buildings. Leith raises her arm and fires a ray of sickness at the kobold mage. It strikes her in the chest and poisons her. Shay blesses Quinta, Thalum, and Luce. The goblin chief is trying to desperately fight the 2 kobolds flanking him. Luce pops out from behind a tree and kills one of the kobolds with a crossbow. They run forward, scoop up the blood in their enchanted bowl, and run back to safety. Thalum fires at the kobold mage with his pistol. He shouts in Goblin, "For the goblins," and shoots the kobold mage in the shoulder. The goblins react to a human speaking in their tongue. Proda runs to a goblin who is bleeding out and uses lay on hands to stabilize him. The kobold mage shoots a fireball at Luce, which they easily shrug off with their fire resistance. The mage ducks behind the statue. Quinta runs forward at a kobold while entering a rage. As she passes the statue, green lights begin to rise from the ground. Faces of goblin ancestors form in the light, and Quinta is surrounded by the spirits of her ancestors. She throws a dagger into the foot of the kobold. The kobold thrusts his spear at Quinta, but she just swats it away with her shield and spits in his face. The kobold behind him throws a dagger at Quinta. She moves her head out of the way and dodges. The kobolds fighting the goblin chief strike at him aggressively. One of them lands a hit. Leith rests her crossbow on Durin to stabilize it and fires at one of the kobolds, dragging the goblin. She kills the kobold, and the goblin is able to break free and run into the woods. Shay calls a spiritual weapon in the form of a falcon to tear out the innards of one of the other kobolds. The falcon then strikes out at the kobold fighting Quinta but misses. The goblin chief stabs one of the kobolds fighting him. The goblin trapped in the burning building begins to shout. Luce runs at the kobold guarding the door to the burning building and stabs him, killing him. Thalum runs forward to get vision on the kobold mage. He fires his longbow and hits the mage with an arrow in the back. Proda moves the goblin he healed to safety behind a building. The goblin mage goes to launch a firebolt at Thalum, but one of the spirit goblins slaps her hand away. Quinta sees Luce killing the kobold guarding the door. She dodges the opportunity attack from the remaining kobold and dives into the burning building. She scoops up the goblin and pulls him closer towards the entrance. The kobold follows Quinta and strikes her in the back. She shrugs off the pain from the strike as she focuses on saving the goblin. A kobold charges Thalum when it sees his leader being attacked and stabs him in the arm with his spear. The goblin chief is nearing defeat at the hands of the 2 kobolds. Leith stabilizes her crossbow on Durin and fires a bolt. It passes through the kobold attacking Thalum and embeds itself in one of the kobolds fighting the goblin chief, killing both. Shay calls down a holy flame, but misses and scorches the area next to the kobold attacking Quinta. The goblin chief begins to feel hopeful and fights back against the last kobold fighting him. The goblin in the burning building takes damage from the fire. Luce helps pull him to safety and pats him out. They turn around and strike the kobold with their packed weapon, cracking its skull and killing it. Quinta nods in respect. Thalum dives at the kobold mage with his short swords out. He drives his swords into either side of her head and twists, snapping her neck. Upon seeing his leader fall, the kobold tries to jump to the horse and escape. The goblin chief grabs it by the tail, pulls it in close, and slits its throat, saying they shouldn't have come to his village. Shay runs over to the burned goblin and heals it with cure wounds. Leith frees the goblins from their cages. They're confused that an elven woman is the one that saved them, but they're appreciative. Leith uses healing word on the goblin chief. Proda has the goblins line up and heals all of them. The rest of the party helps the goblins throw dirt onto the houses to put out the fire. Thalum calls Bowie over. He admires the statue and stabs the kobold mage's corpse. Thalum loots the body and finds a cloak of protection, a spell component pouch, and some gold. Thalum has Bowie practice with his spear on the corpse. He gives Bowie some pastry as a reward. Leith shares her pastries with the goblins after the fires are out. Quinta and Proda chat with the goblin chief. Quinta says that the same thing that happened to her village almost happened here. She half thanks Proda for kind of helping. The chief introduces himself as Chief Corvun of the Bargrive tribe. He apologizes because there's nowhere to really sleep, but they're welcome to camp out in the village.